before the gold towers, before the boardrooms, rallies, and red ties. There was a boy from Queens, New York, born into wealth, but hungry for more. Raised by a calculating father and a distant, elegant mother, he was never meant to follow rules. He was built to bend them. Back before The Apprentice. You think you know Donald Trump? Then let's go back. Before the headlines, before the White House. Because the story of how Donald Trump became one of the most powerful and polarizing figures in American history. Part 1, From Germany to Queens. The Trump bloodline. Long before Donald John Trump became a name known around the world, before the towers, the television shows, the campaigns and controversies, there was Friedrich Trump, a young barber from the German village of Karlstadt. Friedrich was just 16 years old when he left Germany in 1885. He wasn't rich nor educated, but he had what would later become a family trademark, an instinct for opportunity. After arriving in New York, Friedrich worked as a barber, then moved west during the gold rush to make his fortune. But not in gold. He found wealth running restaurants and boarding houses, some of which doubled as brothels, in the mining towns of Seattle and Yukon. He eventually returned to Germany with his profits, hoping to stay, but German authorities expelled him for avoiding mandatory military service. So Friedrich came back to New York for good and brought with him his young bride, Elizabeth Crest. Together, they started a new life in the borough of Queens, where Friedrich invested in real estate and opened the first chapter of what would become the Trump legacy. In 1905, they had a son, Frederick Crest Trump, known as Fred. Fred inherited his father's shrewdness, but none of his romanticism. While Friedrich died during the 1918 flu pandemic, Fred was already thinking bigger. At just 15, he started building garages. By 20, he was constructing homes. By 30, he had built an empire of thousands of middle-class houses across Brooklyn and Queens, particularly targeting veterans returning from WWA. He built not just homes, but a system efficient, profitable, scalable. He kept a low profile and rarely courted press, but he was relentless, calculated, and competitive. And in 1946, Fred and his wife Mary Ann McLeod Trump welcomed their fourth child, Donald John Trump. Mary Ann was a Scottish immigrant from the Isle of Lewis. She arrived in America in 1930, working as a maid before marrying Fred. While Fred was cold, methodical, and business-driven, Mary Ann was religious, traditional, and proper, but also deeply devoted to her children, especially Donald. As a child, Donald was energetic, confident, and mischievous. Family stories say he often threw erasers at teachers and resisted rules. But unlike his brothers and sisters, he was unafraid to challenge his father. The Trump family lived in a 23-room Tudor-style mansion in the leafy Jamaica Estates neighborhood of Queens. It was a wealthy enclave, but not Manhattan. And for Donald, even as a boy, Manhattan was the dream. He didn't want to just build houses. He wanted to build something everyone could see. Fred recognized something in Donald. He once reportedly said, "Donald was always a bit different. The other kids were fine, but Donald, he wanted to be noticed." At just 8 years old, Donald was already boasting he'd be famous one day, but he was also difficult. At age 13, after numerous behavioral issues at the Kew Forest School, Fred sent Donald to the New York Military Academy, a prestigious but strict boarding school 2 hours north of the city. The message was clear: discipline him, or the world will. As Donald packed his bags, he was leaving behind not just his home, but a father he wanted to impress, and a mother he adored. And ahead of him waited uniforms, commands, and a place where charisma alone wouldn't cut it. What no one knew then was that Donald would rise in that rigid system and eventually find a way to bend it to his will. Part 2: Discipline, Ambition, and the Military Academy. When Donald arrived at the New York Military Academy in 1959, he was 13 years old, full of bravado, rebellious streaks, and an undeniable craving to be more than just another boy from Queens. The uniform didn't scare him. The drills didn't faze him. If anything, the structure seemed to give him focus. At NYM, Trump was both a challenge and a force. He wasn't the best student academically, but he stood out in other ways. He became captain of the baseball team, played football, and earned high ranks within the cadet chain of command. Fellow students recalled him as assertive, blunt, and never shy about boasting. Even then, Donald hated losing. He once reportedly told a teammate after a loss in baseball, "Nobody remembers the second-place guy." He was popular with some, disliked by others, but impossible to ignore. Back home, things were shifting. His father, Fred, was growing his real estate empire, focusing on low-income housing development subsidized by federal programs. He was becoming quietly wealthy, amassing thousands of units across Queens and Brooklyn, but he didn't believe in flash or risk. Fred wore the same suit every day, drove a Cadillac with a bumper sticker that read "Vote for Nixon," and refused to build in Manhattan. He was methodical, controlled. Donald thought his father's way was too small. Meanwhile, Mary Ann, Donald's mother, remained a quiet but important influence. She was elegant and charitable, obsessed with British royalty, and deeply religious. Donald often watched her prepare meticulously for formal occasions, developing his lifelong appreciation for image, style, and presentation. Later he'd say, "My mother was beautiful, dignified. She believed in class." It was her polished composure combined with his father's ruthless ambition that created the foundation for what Donald would later become. In Donald's senior year at the military academy, a turning point came. He won the role of cadet captain, a prestigious title that made him one of the highest-ranking students in the school. His leadership style, some said commanding, others said domineering. One teacher reportedly noted, "Donald doesn't follow, he either leads or walks away." After graduation, Fred expected Donald to join the family business immediately, but Donald had other plans. He enrolled at Fordham University, a Jesuit school in the Bronx. He stayed 2 years commuting from Queens and quickly grew bored. It was too quiet, too ordinary. He transferred to the Wharton School of Finance at the University of Pennsylvania in 1966, one of the few schools offering a real estate program at the time. Though later he'd claim he graduated first in his class, Wharton records don't support that. He was respectable but not outstanding. What set him apart wasn't grades, it was how he carried himself. His classmates remembered him as confident, sharply dressed, and constantly talking about building skyscrapers and being famous. "I don't want to be just rich," he once said. "I want the world to know my name." At 22, diploma in hand, Donald returned to New York, but not to be Fred's shadow. He wanted his own kingdom. And while Fred was comfortable dominating outer boroughs like Queens and Brooklyn, Donald looked across the East River with a hunger in his eyes. Manhattan, it was risky, expensive, filled with competition and landmines. Fred warned him, "Don't go into Manhattan. It's not our territory. Too flashy, too dangerous." But Donald didn't want safe. He wanted big. The Trump name, the brand, the mythology. It all began in the mind of that boy from Queens who wore a uniform, barked orders, and dreamt of towers with his name in gold. In the years ahead, he'd break rules, make headlines, fail, and rise again. But everything, the ego, the combativeness, the obsession with image, had been forged between the rigid walls of the military academy and the quiet mansion in Jamaica Estates. Part 3. The Making of a President. In 1971, at just 25 years old, Donald Trump was handed the keys to his father's empire, at least the public-facing part. Fred Trump stayed heavily involved behind the scenes, but the company was renamed the Trump Organization, and Donald was made president. From day one, he set his sights on Manhattan, a world Fred considered reckless, overpriced, and full of sharks. But Donald wasn't interested in playing it safe. Where Fred built rows of identical brick buildings for middle-class families, Donald wanted glass, steel, gold, and his name in giant letters. In 1978, Donald made his first major Manhattan move, the redevelopment of the Commodore Hotel next to Grand Central Station. It was a crumbling property that most investors ignored, but Donald saw potential. With a combination of political connections, aggressive negotiation, and heavy use of tax abatements, he turned it into the Grand Hyatt Hotel, his first big public success. It wasn't just a real estate deal. It was a declaration. Soon came Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, opened in 1983, a 58-story monolith of black glass and brass, filled with luxury condos, a waterfall lobby, and a Gucci store. For the first time, Donald wasn't just a developer. He was a brand. He licensed the Trump name to everything from buildings to board games, bottled water to steaks. He starred in tabloids and made himself the story, an image he crafted carefully, borrowing from his mother's obsession with royalty and his own fascination with dominance. "If you're going to be thinking anyway," he said, "you might as well think big." But for all the success, there were cracks. By the early 90s, Trump was drowning in debt, over-leveraged, overexposed. His casinos in Atlantic City bled cash. His airline and football team collapsed. He became a punchline. But Donald never stopped talking, never stopped pushing his image. And in an era before social media, he mastered something others hadn't: control of the narrative. He wrote books, gave interviews, and declared bankruptcy without admitting failure. By the late 90s, he was back on magazine covers. Then came The Apprentice. The reality TV show launched in 2004 with the now iconic phrase, "You're fired." Trump rebranded himself again, this time as a genius businessman, a tough but fair leader, a cultural figure larger than life. To millions of Americans, he wasn't just rich, he was aspirational. The lines between fact and persona blurred. The Trump brand was no longer just real estate. It was Trump the man, and as the political climate changed, Trump found a new opportunity. In June 2015, he descended the golden escalator in Trump Tower and announced his candidacy for President of the United States. The world laughed. Pundits rolled their eyes. But he didn't blink. Drawing on decades of media manipulation, populist rhetoric, and raw instinct, he steamrolled through the Republican primary. Despite controversies, scandals, and non-stop media chaos, Trump connected with a massive segment of voters who saw in him someone who broke rules, who spoke plainly, who wasn't afraid. In November 2016, Donald J. Trump was elected the 45th President of the United States. He went from boy cadet in Queens to commander-in-chief in Washington. But behind the headlines, tweets, and political storms is still the shadow of a boy, the one who watched his father build, who craved his approval, who stood in a mirror and imagined his name in gold. A boy taught to win. A boy who once stood on the lawn of a mansion in Queens and whispered, "I'm going to be famous." And he was right. They said it was over, that his time had passed, that the red ties and gold towers were fading memories, that America had moved on. But Donald J. Trump never saw politics as something you leave. He saw it as something you win. After leaving the White House in 2021, Trump didn't disappear. He rallied. He posted. He remembered. He built his base louder, stronger, not through institutions but through loyalty. To millions, he was still the outsider who had taken on the establishment and lived to tell about it. The man who spoke without a filter, who made people feel seen or feared. He was, in their eyes, not a politician, but a symbol. In 2024, he announced his return. Not with an apology, not with humility, but with a single promise. We're going to finish what we started. The media called it a stunt. Pundits dismissed it. But something was different this time. The economy was uncertain. The country was fractured. People were angry, exhausted, and looking for something familiar. And Trump, ever the master of timing, stepped back into the ring like he never left it. Rallies returned. Crowds grew. The red hats multiplied again like wildfire. And then the results came in. State by state. Red, blue, contested, flipped. Until finally, Donald J. Trump has been elected the 47th President of the United States. He stood on that stage once more, older, but still defiant. The same man who'd once watched his father build homes in Queens. The same boy who wore a cadet's uniform and promised himself the world. He didn't just come back, he reclaimed it. And for better or worse, America listened. Again.